The Minnesota Vikings made a couple roster moves today in effort to get down to their final 53-man roster, which has to be, I believe, set in stone sometime next week, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's like the 20 something. I can't remember off the top of my head, or the 30th, I believe it is. Whatever the case, this is the final week of preseason, so the Vikings have to figure out who's going to take the roster spots and who's going to be on the practice squad, right? And these two signings today, which I think most of us know exactly who these two are, or at least have a somewhat of a good idea, being that we are Minnesota Vikings fans. Maybe you are, a Minnesota Gophers fan as well. So let's get right to it. We have two signings, which also mean a couple players had to get waived today. Before we get started, though, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It'd be much, much appreciated. So, the Vikings today announced the signing of former Minnesota Golden Gophers running back Mo Ibrahim, I believe is how you say his name, or Muhammad Ibrahim, and offensive lineman Chunk Filiaga. Let me go see his name real quick. One sec. Filianga. Yes, Chuck Filianga to the roster. Now, the former teammates, which they overlapped at the University of Minnesota in 2022, are joining the Vikings as free agents with prior NFL experience. Now, to make room for Mohamed Ibrahim and Chuck Filianga, the Vikings waived undrafted rookie tight end Trey Knox with an injury designation and waived cornerback Jacoby Francis, who had joined the team during training camp. He's seen some, time in the last two preseason games. Wasn't really doing too much. I didn't think he was going to make the initial 53-man roster. There was maybe a shot he'd make the practice squad, but the Vikings knew after signing Stephon Gilmore that they're going to have to get rid of somebody, and especially after signing these two, you definitely have to get rid of people, right? Now, Ibrahim joined the Detroit Lions as an undrafted free agent in 2023, but he suffered an injury during the preseason that sidelined him before he rejoined Detroit's practice squad last October. Ibrahim was elevated for Detroit's October 22nd game at Baltimore and returned one kickoff for 22 yards, but he also got injured again. He suffered a hip dislocation during the play. He left the game on a cart, but remained determined to work his way back. Now, the native of Baltimore, Maryland, dazzled for Minnesota, especially during a 2020 game at Maryland. Ibrahim rushed for 207 yards and tied a program single-game record with 4 touchdowns against his home state team. Now, although he suffered an Achilles injury in the 2021 season opener against Ohio State, where he had 30 rushes for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns, he was balling, straight up balling. I remember watching that game. It was fantastic, right? He bounced back in 2022 when he set the single-season school records for rushing attempts, which is 320, rushing yards, 1,665, rushing and total touchdowns with 20, total points, 120, 100-yard games, which he had 10, and rushing yards per game, 153.7. He's the all-time GOAT when it comes to running backs for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. He broke basically every record you can think of at the running back position. He was an absolute dog. I loved watching him play. The only thing that plagued him at the end of his career just happened to be the injuries, right? And you see that he got injured again with the Detroit Lions in preseason. Then he, works his way back in the rehab process, gets back on the field, gets elevated to the active roster, takes a kickoff back or returns a kickoff for 20-some yards, gets hurt again. So there's that little bit, there's some uncertainty of how healthy this guy will remain for an entire season, but he's got a lot of fight. When he's healthy, he runs super hard, so I think he brings a lot to that running back room. Not saying he's going to make the roster. I believe he has a chance to. It's going to be pretty tough with Kene Wangu obviously taking a lot of those roles as the third-string guy, and then obviously as our kick and punt returner. Maybe Ibrahim takes over some of those roles. I'm not 100% sure, but I could see him making the team as a practice squad player. Now, Ibrahim also has school records for rushing yards, 4,668, rushing and total touchdowns at 53, 100-yard games with 24, 200-yard games with 5, consecutive 200-yard games with 2, which was during the 2020 season, the season before he ruptured his Achilles, and consecutive 100-yard games with which he had 19 from January 1st of 2020 through November 19th of 2022. So if he brings that type of production to the Minnesota Vikings, boy, that's a diamond in the rough right there. Okay, that would be fantastic. Probably not going to happen. I don't think that's realistic at all, but you got to have hope for a former Minnesota Gopher. The other Minnesota or former Minnesota Gopher. Chuck Filianga is a former Michigan Wolverine from 2017 to 2021 and a Minnesota Golden Gopher when he played his final year in 2022. Now, he is joining the Minnesota Vikings after playing for the UFL San Antonio Brahmas this spring. Filianga started 7 of 10 games played for the Brahmas, coached by Wade Phillips, the former NFL coach and father of Vikings offensive coordinator Wes Phillips. So this signing does make a little bit, of some sense, okay? He was coached by a guy that has NFL head coaching experience, and our offensive coordinator just happens to be his son. So I'm sure Wes Phillips made a couple calls. Who do you got on the team that looks good, especially at the offensive line? And Wade was probably like, hey, Filianga, he's got it, man. I think he could bring some interesting dynamic to your team, maybe some a good depth piece to your roster. So we ended up making the signing. Now last year, Filianga joined the Packers as an undrafted free agent. He also spent time with the New Orleans Saints during their 2023 training camp. He's a native of Aledo, Texas. Filianga played in 39 games at Michigan before transferring to Minnesota. In 2022, he started all 13 games at right guard and blocked for an offense that rushed for 2,698 yards and 33 touchdowns and passed for 2,369 yards and 12 touchdowns. Okay, so he has some decent experience at that right guard position, which is basically where or why we brought him in here. We don't have much depth at the offensive line at all. Okay, we've seen the 2s, we've seen the 3s, and I'm gonna tell you straight up, it's ugly, man. If we lose one starter besides David Questenberry and Austin Schlottman, which we've seen, and they've gotten many reps as starters for the Minnesota Vikings over the past couple years due to other injuries, we really don't have much to work with, right? We're still wondering if Ed Ingram's going to figure his stuff out. Who knows if that's going to happen? So I think this signing of Chuck Filianga has a little bit more meaning to it because I feel like there's a better chance that he makes the active 53-man roster, even though he was added late in this preseason to the team. I think he brings an interesting. There's just something about him that says, hey, there's a good chance we're going to see this guy on the active 53-man roster, and maybe even a good chance we see him during the regular season. It probably won't happen just because he hasn't received an opportunity before. But if he doesn't make the active 53-man, I think he has a really, really good chance at making the practice squad just because due to the depth that we don't have at the offensive line. I think he gives us a little bit of leeway. So if he's on our practice squad, that means we could bring him up if injuries do happen. So I like this signing or these signings of Mohamed Ibrahim and Chuck Filianga because, boy, when they're healthy, they are game changers. And if they get an opportunity, I feel like they're going to seize every moment of that opportunity. So hopefully things work out for them. Again, don't see them making the active 53-man roster. Chuck Filianga, though, has a better chance than Mohamed to do so. I could see these guys as practice squad players. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It'd be much, much appreciated. Have a great rest of your night, folks. And Skol Vikes.